The wind screamed through the high peaks of the Colorado Rockies and bit through wool and leather like teeth. Down in the valley, dry weeds and sagebrush shook in the cold air. It was hard country, the kind that chewed up weak men and spat them out. Only the stubborn survived here, and most of them carried scars you could not see. Ezra Hawthorne had lived with this harsh land for years. His cabin stood in a small grove of aspens partway up the mountain, 3 miles from the rough little town of Copper Creek. He had cut every log himself. He had built the stone fireplace with his own hands. The cabin was small, plain, and lonely, just like the man who lived in it. Ezra did not mind being alone. 5 years earlier, he had buried his wife, Mary, and their baby girl, Sarah, under an old cottonwood by the stream. Fever had taken them both in one terrible week. Since then, he had decided that solitude was safer than love. Solitude did not die. Solitude did not leave. Once a month, he rode his mule, Bessie, down the narrow trail into Copper Creek. He went for salt, coffee, ammunition, flour, and sometimes a bottle of whiskey if he could spare the silver. He spoke little. He stayed away from gossip. People watched him but did not bother him. A quiet mountain man with a rifle and a sad face was someone most folks left alone. That morning, the sky was clear and sharp. Ezra's breath showed white as he guided Bessie down the rocky path. Copper Creek lay below them, a mess of wood buildings and muddy streets. Smoke rose from crooked chimneys. Even from the ridge, he could hear the out-of-tune piano at the Broken Wheel Saloon. He tied Bessie outside Morrison's general store and went in. Old Morrison knew his habits. The two men barely exchanged 10 words while Ezra bought what he needed. In a few minutes he was done, his coins lighter, his saddlebags heavier. He should have gone home. Instead, he turned toward the Broken Wheel, not because he wanted company, not because he craved whiskey. It was habit. One drink before the long climb up. One drink to soften the edges of memories that sometimes pressed too close in town. The saloon smelled like tobacco smoke, spilled beer and sweat. Sawdust covered the floor. Men hunched over cards and drinks. Ezra walked to the far end of the bar and took the seat with his back to the wall, as he always did. He sipped his whiskey, quiet, watchful. The shouting started when he was on his second glass. $20! A man's voice slurred. $20, and she's yours. At first, Ezra did not look. He knew that tone. A drunk man trying to sell something. Most times it was a saddle or a rifle. Sometimes it was a wagon. Men did desperate things when money ran out. Come on now, the voice pushed on. Somebody must need help around their place. She's a good girl, strong for her age. The word hit Ezra like a stone. Girl. His fingers tightened around his glass. The room went sharper. The noise of the piano stopped. Men turned but did not move. No one wanted to see. No one wanted to act. Slowly, Ezra turned his head. A thin farmer stood near the poker tables, weaving on his feet. Ezra knew his face from town. Silas Kane. The man carried the look of worn-out fields and broken hopes. His clothes hung on him. His eyes were wild. At his side stood a child. She looked 8 or 9. Her dress, once blue, had faded to a dull gray. Her hair was dark and tangled, hanging around a face that was all sharp bones and hollow cheeks. She held a small cloth bundle tight against her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She can cook, clean, tend animals, Silas said, words running together. Just need enough for a horse. Can't work my claim without a horse. That's your daughter, Silas. Someone near the poker table muttered. You can't just... Can't what? Silas snapped. Can't feed her, can't keep her warm. You offering to help Tom? The other man looked away. No? Then shut your mouth. The whole scene twisted inside Ezra. For a moment, he was not in the saloon at all. He was a boy again, watching his own father sell his sister to pay gambling debts. He saw her small hand reaching for him. He saw her eyes filling with terror as a stranger led her away. He remembered standing frozen, doing nothing. Years later, he had found her again in Denver. Sick, used up, dead before 20. This time, he was not a boy. I'll take her." The words were out before he knew he was going to speak. The saloon went silent. Men turned to stare at the quiet mountain man who almost never opened his mouth. Silas squinted. "You what?" Ezra stood, tall and solid, shadow falling across the room. "I said I'll take her. $20. He pulled a small pouch from inside his coat and counted out silver coins onto the bar. It was almost everything he had left. Silas lurched closer, eyes fixed on the money, not the child. "Well now," he said with a crooked grin, "seems we got ourselves a deal, Mr. Hawthorne." Ezra walked toward them. Up close he could see the girl trembling. "Up," Silas barked, shaking her shoulder. "You hear that, Emma? This man's going to take care of you now. You be good for him, you hear?" The girl slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were the clear blue of a high mountain lake. They were filled with fear and a hurt far too old for her age. She looked at her father, then at Ezra, then back again. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Silas shoved her forward. "She's yours." He snatched the coins from the bar and staggered for the door. He did not look back, not once. Ezra stood there with the child in front of him and the whole saloon watching. He had acted on rage and memory. Now a small girl was staring up at him, and he had no plan. "Come on," he said at last, his voice rough. "We're leaving." He turned and walked toward the door. For a heartbeat, he feared she might refuse to move. Then he heard the soft drag of her worn shoes in the sawdust, following. Outside, the daylight seemed too bright. The world looked the same, but nothing was the same at all. Ezra loaded his supplies onto Bessie while Emma stood a few feet away, still clutching her bundle, his coat too big for her eyes. He could feel her fear like a cold wind. He thought of taking her to the church in town. Maybe they could find a proper family. Someone with a wife, with children, with a clean house and warm quilts. Then he remembered his sister in that Denver brothel. He remembered the way most so-called good families looked away from pain when it cost them something. No, he would not hand this girl back to chance. "You ever ridden a mule?" he asked. She shook her head. "Well, come on then. We got a long way to go before dark." He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing. He set her on the mule's back and adjusted the supplies so she had more room. "Hold on to the saddle horn. Bessie is steady. She won't drop you." They left Copper Creek as shadows stretched long across the ground. Ezra walked ahead, leading Bessie. His rifle rested on his back. Emma sat stiff and silent, hands white on the saddle horn. They traveled a mile without a word, then another. At a small spring by the trail, Ezra stopped. "There's water," he said, "if you're thirsty." She slid down from the mule, moved to the spring, and drank from her hands. She splashed some water on her face, then came back and stood near Bessie again, bundle still held tight. "What's in there?" Ezra asked, nodding toward the cloth bundle. She hesitated. "My mama's handkerchief," she whispered, "and a piece of cornbread." "When did you eat last?" She only shrugged. Ezra took a strip of jerky from his saddlebag and held it out. She took it slowly, as if she expected him to snatch it back. When he did not, she bit into it and chewed in small, careful bites, trying to make it last. They climbed higher. The air grew colder as the sun began to sink behind the peaks. Emma started to shiver. Ezra took off his coat and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. It hung almost to the mule's knees, but it kept her from shaking so hard. At last, the cabin came into view, a dark square against the white snow and dark pines. "This is it," Ezra said. "Home." He helped her down. She stood staring at the little cabin, clutching her bundle in his oversized coat. After a moment, she took one tiny step toward the door. Inside, the single room was bare but neat. A bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs in another. Shelves with simple dishes. A stone fireplace, cold and dark. Ezra lit a fire, his hands moving from habit. Soon, the flames filled the room with orange light and warmth chased away the worst of the mountain chill. "You can sit," he said, nodding to a chair. "I'll fix us something to eat." She perched on the edge of the chair, ready to jump. Her bundle never left her arms. Ezra cooked beans and a little salt pork. He gave her the larger share without comment. "Go on," he said. "Eat." She ate slowly, still watching him as if he might change at any moment. When they were done, he added more wood to the fire. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." He started spreading blankets on the floor. When he turned back, she was no longer in the chair. She had pressed herself into a dark corner, back against the wall, eyes wide, shaking hard. "What are you doing over there?" he asked. She did not answer. Then he understood. Of course she was afraid. Her own father had sold her to a stranger. A big, rough man had brought her to a lonely cabin. In her mind, she knew what might happen next. Men like Jake Sullivan and others had plans for girls like her. Ezra felt sick. Slowly he lowered himself to the floor so he would not tower over her. "Emma," he said quietly, "listen to me if you can." She gave a tiny nod. "I am not going to hurt you. Not ever. Do you understand? You are safe here." Her eyes searched his face, trying to see if he was lying. "I had a daughter once," he said. "Sarah. She was just a baby when she died. Fever took her and her mama 5 winters ago." He had not spoken those words out loud in years. His chest hurt saying them, but somehow it felt right to tell this child the truth. "I bought you from your pa because I could not stand to see what was happening. No child should be sold like an animal. I do not want anything from you except to see you fed and safe. That is all." The silence stretched. Then her small voice broke it. "Are you going to sell me like Papa?" The question hit him harder than any fist. His vision blurred. A tightness he had carried for 5 long years finally snapped. Ezra Hawthorne, the hard mountain man, began to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs he could not stop. He turned his head, ashamed, but the sobs kept coming. Years of grief and guilt poured out on the rough cabin floor. "No!" he forced out between breaths. "Never! You hear me? Never!" When the storm inside him finally eased, he wiped his face with his sleeve and looked up. Emma had edged a little away from the wall. She still clutched her bundle, still wary, but something in her eyes had changed. "You can have the bed," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "The bed is yours. I have slept on rocks and snow. I will be fine." "I usually sleep in the barn," she said. "When Papa remembers to unlock it." Ezra shut his eyes for a moment, fighting down fresh anger. "You will never sleep in a barn again," he said. "Not while you live under my roof. The bed is yours, every night, warm and safe." She moved toward it slowly, as if the blankets might vanish. She touched the quilt with gentle fingers, then climbed up, still in her clothes, still holding her bundle. "I'll be right here by the fire," he said. "Door is barred. No one can get in. You can sleep." She lay stiff at first, eyes wide, staring at the rafters. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf called. Emma flinched. "Just wolves," Ezra said. "They do not come near the cabin. Fire scares them. Papa said wolves would eat me if I ran away. Your papa said many things that were not true." After a while, her eyes grew heavy. Her breathing slowed. Her small body relaxed into the thin mattress. At last, she slept. Ezra did not. He sat on his pallet by the fire and watched her. The flames burned low, then to embers. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the rough world in white. He had lost one family to sickness and fate. He had failed his sister as a boy. He would not fail this child. Whatever it cost, whatever it took, he would keep her safe. The wolves cried again in the night, but Emma did not wake. Inside that little mountain cabin, for the first time in 5 years, Ezra Hawthorne shared his roof with another soul. One broken man. One broken child. And the first fragile promise of a new kind of family. Spring thaw crept slowly across the mountains, melting winter's deep silence and waking the land again. Where snow had covered every inch of the valley, small patches of brown earth now peeked through. Streams swelled with cold water. Birds returned to the trees around Ezra's cabin. And Emma, once frightened and hollow as a shadow, began to change with the season. In the early weeks after Ezra brought her home, she moved carefully, always watching, always ready to run. But as the days grew longer, she learned Ezra's ways and the rhythm of mountain life. He never raised his voice. He never touched her without asking. He gave her space to breathe, to heal, and slowly her fear began to loosen its hold. Her first lesson came with the fire. "Keep these kindling pieces dry," Ezra said one morning. "Without fire, a winter night can kill a grown man." Emma nodded seriously and learned to stack wood, bank coals, and sweep ashes. Soon she could keep the cabin warm through cold nights without help. Her next lessons were about water, food, chores, and the quiet rules of the mountains. She carried water from the stream without spilling. She helped split kindling with a small hatchet, her thin arms growing steadier day by day. She learned to read the way clouds gathered around the peaks and what those clouds meant. She learned the sounds of the woods, the difference between a deer's steps and a bear's weight, between a harmless wind in the aspens and something dangerous moving where it shouldn't. One morning as she practiced splitting small sticks, Ezra watched her with quiet pride. "Hold the axe lower," he said gently. "Let the weight do the work." Emma adjusted her grip. The axe came down clean. The wood split. She blinked, surprised, then smiled. A small, rare smile that made something warm move in Ezra's chest. "Good," he said. "Stack it with the others." Her hands blistered that first week, but she never complained. That night, Ezra rubbed bear grease on her palms and wrapped them in cloth. "They'll toughen," she said, studying his large, scarred hands. "Like yours." Quote. "In time," he agreed. "Everything takes time up here." But the hardest lessons were the ones meant to keep her alive. A child in the mountains had to know danger, and Ezra taught her with simple, clear words. "That track there is rabbit," he said as they walked near the stream. "Soft prints, small feet." She nodded. "This one is deer. See how the hooves press in? And this?" He pointed at a deep pad with long claw marks. "Mountain lion. Female. Likely with babies." Emma squatted beside the print. "How can you tell it's a mama?" "Because she's moving careful. A male roams wider. A mother hunts for two." Emma touched the print gently. "Will she come near the cabin?" "Not if she can help it. But we stay watchful." She nodded again. Watchful was something she had learned long before she met him. Soon, Emma learned to set snares for rabbits, to fish the cold, clear streams, and to gather edible plants. She studied everything with hungry focus, not just because she wanted to learn, but because she knew, deep in her bones, that knowledge meant safety. Ezra taught her to handle a knife, not for chores, for protection. "A grown man might grab you," he said quietly. "If that happens, go for the soft spots. Then run. Don't be brave, be alive." Emma nodded. She listened. She practiced. Survival had been her life before. Now Ezra gave her tools to do it better. Finally came the rifle. The first time she held the small .22, it looked too big in her hands. Ezra guided her stance gently. "Steady," he said. "Breathe out slow. Squeeze. Don't jerk." The rifle cracked. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Her shot went wide, but she stayed calm, adjusted her feet, and tried again. "Good," Ezra said. "You didn't flinch. That's half the battle." By late summer, she could hit a target more often than not. Ezra watched her with amazement. She learned fast, faster than any child he had known, but he hoped she would never need to use those skills for real. One early autumn morning, the test came. Ezra had gone to check trap lines. The air was cool. The sun had barely risen. When he left, Emma stood on the porch, rifle close at hand, just as he taught her. He had been gone only 2 hours when he heard the shot, one loud crack echoing across the canyon. Ezra started running. His breath burned his lungs. His heart hammered. He pushed through brush and rocks until he reached the clearing around the cabin. Emma stood on the porch, her small rifle still pointed at the ground. Smoke trailed from the barrel. A young black bear was stumbling away from the root cellar toward the trees. "It was trying to get in," Emma said, voice steady but hands shaking. "Just like you said, I fired over its head." Ezra let out the breath he'd been holding. "You did right," he said. "You kept your head when it counted." That night they sat close by the fire, the danger still fresh in their minds. "I was scared," she whispered. "Good," Ezra said. "Being scared keeps you alive. What matters is you acted anyway." "Would you have shot it if it didn't leave?" "If it threatened you," he said simply, without a second thought. Quote. She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the truth of that. By the time snow began creeping down the peaks again, Emma had changed in ways Ezra had not expected. She had gained weight. Her cheeks were no longer hollow. Her hair shone with health. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. The haunted look had faded. Not gone. Maybe it would never be fully gone. But now her eyes held something new. Trust, purpose, maybe even a spark of happiness. One evening, Emma stood outside the cabin, looking at the dark clouds gathering over the ridge. "Storm coming," she announced. "Big one." Ezra studied the sky and nodded. "You read it right. Let's get ready." They hauled in extra wood, checked the roof, sealed the windows, and made sure their food stores were tight. Emma hummed softly while she worked. It was the first time Ezra heard her hum without fear. That night, the storm hit. Wind slammed against the cabin walls. Snow whipped sideways. The fire roared as the only warm light in a cold world. Ezra sharpened tools while Emma patched a shirt. When the storm grew too loud for talking, they fell into a silence that was easy and comfortable. Two people once broken by loss now sat side by side, warmed by the fire and by something they had built together. A new kind of home, a new kind of family. Neither said the word aloud. Not yet, but it lived in the quiet between them. The mountain outside was wild and harsh, but inside that cabin, in the orange glow of the fire, two souls who had been alone far too long found something they had almost forgotten how to hold. Belonging. And soon, trouble from the valley would come climbing the mountain and try to tear that new family apart. Winter slammed into the mountains earlier than anyone expected. By November, snow piled 3 feet deep around the cabin, and drifts reached the windows. The trails became dangerous. Copper Creek felt farther away than ever. Ezra had lived through winters like this alone, but this time he had to think about Emma, and their food stores were not as deep as he wanted. "We'll need to stretch what we have," Ezra said as they checked the root cellar. "Small portions, no waste." Emma nodded. "I'm used to being hungry." "Not anymore," Ezra said firmly. "Not while you're with me." The wolves came next. Their howls circled the cabin each night, hungry, desperate, driven closer by the hard freeze. One night, the scratching at the door jerked Ezra awake. Low growls rose from every side of the cabin. A heavy body slammed against the wood. Emma sat up in her bed, eyes wide. "Stay there," Ezra whispered, grabbing his rifle. But she had already reached for her own. "I can help." Before he could argue, another slam shook the door hard enough to rattle the bar. A wolf climbed the woodpile outside and clawed at the roof. "All right," Ezra said, "but follow me exactly." They stood at opposite windows. On Ezra's count, they fired into the air at the same time. The shots echoed through the valley. Wolves scattered, but not far. They paced the edge of the clearing, watching, waiting. "They'll be back," Ezra said. "We keep the fire high. We keep wood inside, no mistakes." The next days were a siege. Ezra risked running to the woodpile while Emma stood guard with the truck. 22. Once a wolf rushed him, teeth bared. Emma fired at the ground near it. The animal skidded away. "Good shooting," Ezra panted as he dashed back inside, steady under pressure. But worry grew. The woodpile shrank, the food thinned, snow kept falling. Then came the blizzard. The wind screamed like something alive. Snow whipped so thick they couldn't see the trees 10 feet away. The cabin creaked under the weight of the storm. They wrapped themselves in blankets near the fire. "Tell me about spring," Emma whispered, shivering. Ezra talked about wildflowers, warm sun, trout, in the streams. He talked until her eyes stopped shaking. Outside, the storm roared on. When morning came, an eerie silence lay over everything. Snow towered higher than the windows. They dug out the door, checked the shed, gathered what little the blizzard hadn't taken. "This winter wants us dead," Emma muttered. "We won't let it have us," Ezra replied. But the mountain had more tests waiting. One morning, while checking trap lines, Ezra collapsed. Hunger, cold, and exhaustion hit him all at once. He fell face first into the snow. He might have died there. Except Emma followed him, against his strict instructions. She dragged him back to the cabin, her small body shaking with effort. She built the fire, made pine needle tea, forced him to drink, fed him their last scraps even though she had none herself. For 2 days she stayed at his side, watching him breathe, checking his fever, refusing to sleep. When Ezra opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was Emma curled beside him on the floor, wrapped in her thin coat because she had given him all the blankets. "You stubborn girl," he croaked. She lifted her head, tears shining. "I learned from the best." As winter loosened its grip, the snow softened, the light returned, and green shoots pushed through the earth. They had survived, barely, but they had survived together, and with spring came new threats from the world below. During a supply trip to town, Ezra heard the name he hoped he'd never hear again: Jake Sullivan, a trader who dealt in stolen goods, false promises, and sometimes children. Morrison leaned close to Ezra. "Sullivan's back," he whispered. "Says Silas promised him Emma, says you cheated him." Ezra's jaw went tight. A man like Sullivan didn't forget a denied prophet. When he told Emma what he'd heard, she went pale. "What if he comes here?" "He won't reach you," Ezra said. "Not while I breathe." But Sullivan didn't come to the mountain first. He went to the town council. Soon, 3 men rode up the trail: Reverend Collins, Morrison, and Isaac Hartley. "We've come to speak about the child," the Reverend said. Emma froze beside the table, hands shaking. "There are claims," Collins continued. "Sullivan says he had an agreement with Silas Kane. That you interfered." "Legal arrangements," Hartley added sharply. "We must be certain the girl is safe." Ezra's eyes hardened. "You cared nothing for her safety when her father locked her in barns and fed her scraps." "That is not the point," Hartley snapped. "It's exactly the point." But the council demanded a hearing, a formal one, in town, with the law watching. When the day came, the church was packed. Ezra wore his plainest clean clothes. Emma wore her one good dress. Her hands trembled, but her chin stood firm. Sullivan was there too, smug and dressed in a cheap suit. "I had to deal with Silas Kane," Sullivan said proudly. "Girl was mine by right." Ezra stepped forward. "Children are not property." Sullivan sneered. "Everything's property out here if you pay the right price." The room stirred with anger. Then Emma stood. Her voice was soft but steady. "Mr. Sullivan used to visit our farm. He brought whiskey. He told Papa I was valuable. He said girls my age could earn money." Women in the crowd gasped. "You liar!" Sullivan roared. But Sheriff Garrett entered with a woman from Denver, a woman who had been tricked by Sullivan the same way years before. Her testimony broke whatever doubt remained. The judge listened to every word. He watched Emma. He watched Ezra. At last he said, "By the power of this court, I grant Ezra Hawthorne full legal guardianship of Emma Kane. Adoption papers will be written today." The room exploded with relief. Emma ran into Ezra's arms, sobbing. Ezra held her tight, his heart full in a way he had not felt in years. "Papa," she whispered for the first time. "Thank you." He kissed the top of her head. "Always." They walked home from the valley as father and daughter, not by blood, not by money, but by choice and by love. The next years passed with warmth and steady peace. Emma grew taller, stronger, smarter. She learned to read as well as any school child. She learned to track game better than most men. She laughed freely now, something Ezra treasured more than food or gold. She asked about his wife, Mary, and baby Sarah, and he told her stories. She added them to her own memory, as if they were her people too. The cabin, once silent, filled with light again. But life brought one last piece of unfinished business. One evening, the sheriff rode up the trail with a letter. Silas Kane, Emma's birth father, had frozen to death on the plains. He had been carrying a note addressed to her. Emma read it with trembling hands. It was a clumsy apology, full of regret. When she finished, she cried. Soft, confused tears. "I hate him," she whispered, "but I'm still sad." "Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Ezra said, holding her close. "He was your father. It's natural to mourn what could have been." Emma placed Silas's letter on the mantel beside Mary and Sarah's picture. "He gave me away," she said quietly. "But that brought me to you. Maybe that's the only good thing he ever did." Summer came again. One bright morning, Emma called from the ridge. "Papa! Fresh elk tracks! Want to hunt?" Ezra took his rifle and climbed toward her. She moved with grace through the trees, confident and bold. She slipped her hand into his as they walked. "Papa," she said, "thank you for seeing me in that saloon, for knowing I was worth $20. Ezra swallowed hard. "You were worth everything I had, and more." They climbed the hill above their cabin. The valley spread below them, green, alive, full of hope. Smoke curled from their chimney. The home they built together stood solid against the mountains. "Race you back!" Emma shouted suddenly, laughter ringing across the trees. Ezra ran after her, laughing too. A deep, warm laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. Together they tumbled through the cabin door, breathless and glowing. Ezra looked at Emma, his daughter, his purpose, his redemption, and knew he was the richest man in Colorado territory. Not in silver, not in land, but in love. And in a world that often priced children like cattle, that was worth more than all the gold in the mountains.